Good afternoon. There's something important that citizens of Zimbabwe must know about. A few months ago, the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi visited Harare just a few months before Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel. We know that the proxy war in the Gaza Strip is a war really between Israel and Iran. Iran, whose intention is to wipe the Israel state off the face of the earth. And seeing that the war is waging on, and knowing now that the time when the Iranian president visited Zimbabwe, he knew what uh, Hamas was planning, since he is the main sponsor of Hamas. Visiting Zimbabwe was to secure a very key dynamic in this war, which is uranium. Uranium is needed by Iran for its uranium enrichment program that will enable it to have a nuclear weapon. A nuclear weapon that it would possibly use against Israel. And that is the whole reason why Iran has got US sanctions. And the United States has sanctioned all nations that provide or seek to provide Iran with uranium. In the visit to Harare, nothing was said about uranium, but the visit and timing is very suspect. Zimbabwe and Uganda both have uranium deposits. That is, which means that both of these countries, Iran seeks to develop friendship with, so that they can access the uranium resources. Now, you would understand another dynamic here, that the United States and Israel would place sanctions on countries that uh, sell their uranium to Iran. But Zimbabwe is already under sanctions. 10 years ago, when the then Iranian president visited Zimbabwe, President Robert Mugabe was cheerfully willing to help Iranians with the sale of uranium, because he at that time told himself that them and Iran are hated by the West, therefore they could just be friends and do as they please. And back then, the tensions between Iran and the United States wasn't so much. We have had deals between Iran and the United States signed by uh, President Barack Obama, and also they had other agreements with President Trump. And the issue is a thorn in U.S. Foreign policy, and it is critical to the survival of Israel in the Middle East. With tensions rising these days uh, in the Middle East, it is important that the Israeli defense system locks its grip against the enemies of Israel. And therefore, the issue of uranium and Iran's capabilities to enrich in uranium for the purposes of building a nuclear weapon against Israel becomes very pertinent at a critical war time like this for Israel. And the timing is very suspect for Ibrahim Raisi to visit Harare, which is rich in uranium, just before the planned attacks on Israel, which puts us as Zimbabweans in the middle of this war in the Middle East, a war that most of us thought we are not involved in, or has got nothing to do with us. But as we can see, in the long run, if the war becomes much deeper and more entrenched, Zimbabwe's uranium would become very essential to Iran, and therefore Iran would love to extract that uranium from Zimbabwe via our leader, who is President Emerson Mnangagwa, who also is under US sanctions and feels the same way as Robert Mugabe, that they and Iran, who are under US sanctions, should be friends and seek to help each other out. Therefore, the only help that Iran needs from Zimbabwe is not gold or diamonds, it is uranium. For one of the major foreign policy goals of Iran is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Now, listen very carefully, Zimbabwe. As Israel, which has got the right to defend itself, is finding itself having to fight a global war, a heavy war against their own survival. They start in the Gaza Strip against Hamas, but that is nothing. Israel knows that the main their main opponent is Iran. After that, Israel begins to figure out who is empowering Iran and who is enabling Iran to have this ability to get a nuclear bomb. And Israel gets to look at Zimbabwe, which has got uranium, and looks at President Emerson Mnangagwa, who is becoming friendly and cozy with Iran. At a time like this, that relationship becomes very suspicious for Israel, and that puts Zimbabwe under the radar of Israel in this geopolitical conflict. And I do not think that it is safe for the Zimbabwean citizens to live under a ZANU-PF regime led by Emerson Mnangagwa that is seeking the wrath of Israel by befriending with Iran and possibly enabling Iran to acquire Zimbabwean uranium that will enable Iran to build a nuclear weapon that will destroy Israel. Israel would look at Emerson Mnangagwa and the rest of Zimbabwe in the same way it looks at the Gaza Strip. I want to spare you the details of what would happen in a full-on war if Israel were to take the war much further and much deeper for their survival. It is important that policymakers in Harare are aware of such dynamics, and I'm sure they are aware of such dynamics, but it is also important for the citizens of Zimbabwe to be aware of such dynamics and such possible developments. Lest you wake up in the morning, you hear that Harare is being bombed by Israel, and you are wondering why, from where. It is because Idi Mnangagwa's friendship with Iran might as well put the rest of the Zimbabweans' lives at risk. So in your calculations, if you're Nelson Chamisa, part of the opposition, in your calculations for the reason for opposing Mnangagwa, or if you are a member of ZANU-PF, in your calculations for the reasons for removing Mnangagwa, or if you're in the Zimbabwe security cluster, you must be looking at that threat as an existential threat to all Zimbabwean lives. This time, gentlemen, it's not just about money. It's not about gold. It's not about gold mines and diamond mines and access to the land. It's about life itself. There will be no Zimbabwean alive to enjoy the money if Israel takes the war that deeper and that further. And if the war in the Gaza Strip escalates into a deeply entrenched regional war that will really become a world war when Israel and the Western countries begin to consider Zimbabwe as an adversary at this juncture. So it is paramount for the Zimbabweans, not for Idi Mnangagwa, because Idi Mnangagwa, should that circumstance befall us, he will be in some hotel in Singapore watching as Israel drops bombs on in Harare. Just like the leaders of Hamas are in the Middle East, they in Doha, sipping expensive cocktails in the hotels of Doha, whilst the women and children in the Gaza Strip are dying every day. As a Zimbabwean, as I watch the news and see the women and children dying in the Gaza Strip because Israel is fighting Hamas, I see the possibility of how that kind of a scenario could be happening in Zimbabwe as Israel is seeking the enemies of Israel. Gentlemen and ladies, do not take this lightly. This is not a video to garner some YouTube views. I don't care about YouTube views or YouTube money. It is important for national security, for the survival of Zimbabwe as a nation, that we understand that, so that you can see the gravity of the issue and the necessity of removing President Emerson Mnangagwa from power and installing a pro-US, uh, pro-Israeli government that will bring security in Zimbabwe, a government that understands these issues so that the global order can remain intact. Otherwise, the view of the West and the view of Israel is that President Emerson Mnangagwa is currently a threat to the global order. And the ball is on our court as Zimbabweans to see that we ourselves do not get caught up in Emerson Mnangagwa's miscalculations, foreign policy miscalculations. Our support for Israel should be based on understanding that the post World War II global order is essential to be maintained, for it it helps foster for rapid development, peace, human rights, human dignity, and above all, accountability. The rogue nations led by Iran and others, especially Russia, that seek to break away from uh, from this golden era that has brought this global order, that has brought peace and prosperity, and has led many countries to be free, especially African countries gained their independence post the Second World War under this global order led by the United States, a key ally of Israel. It is important that we understand that rogue elements in various countries have emerged, and they are characterized by rampant corruption, disrespect for human rights, and unwillingness to share resources with the rest of the nation's citizens. One of the countries in which such a scenario is largely expressed is in Zimbabwe, where ZANU-PF elite have consolidated power and all national resources for the benefit of the few families, to the suffering of the rest of the Zimbabweans. Therefore, it is essential for citizens, concerned citizens of Zimbabwe, to see that if this dynamic is allowed, or if this scenario in Harare is left unattended to, we ourselves will find ourselves suffering for the sins and the miscalculation of President Emerson Mnangagwa. My name is Ngobani Zondo. My hope and prayer and dream is to shift Zimbabwe from this group of rogue political enemies back into the family of the post-war global order with total respect for human rights, human dignity, being dedicated to socio-economic development to ease the pain on the Zimbabwean populace, to bring back accountability into government and our governance systems, to create robust systems that are in line with the global standards for shared prosperity of all men and women who call Zimbabwe home. Having said this, it is therefore important for all people, if you're a Zimbabwean, and the international community to understand why us Zimbabweans need a regime change. It is essential for the preservation of global order, for the current regime is a threat to global peace. Have a great afternoon.